And welcome to the first Gold Coast Elite Sports Conference webinar of 2021. It is great to be back and great to have everyone back on board. I'm Harriet Brown. I'm introducing the first webinar. It's a series of 4 online webinars which leads into the three-day on and offline Gold Coast Elite Sports Conference, which is later in the year. Thank you for being patient with us with the change in time. It's great that everyone could still be part of it. And thanks for tuning in from all around the world to listen to our good friend Hannah Huesman from the Philadelphia Phillies, who is back by popular demand after joining us for the conference in 2020. I'm especially a fan of the Mental Sweat Mondays. If you don't know what I'm talking about, check out the Instagram after the session. I'd like to thank our partners for the ongoing support to support education and development around global sport. So they have been incredible in supporting us, especially our major sponsor, the City of Gold Coast. So thanks, City of Gold Coast, back again. We really appreciate it. Other sponsors, Gold Coast Super Clinic Physiotherapy, Coomera Anglican College, Oztech Connect, Lynn Hughes Property, Pain Pod, Spalms, Player Path, and RDK Sports International. I'll now pass you on to our MC guru, Peter Munt from RDK Sports International, who will introduce our special guest.
Well, good morning to everyone that's in Australia, and then to those that are joining us internationally, welcome to our first webinar. I have had the pleasure before of, I would say interviewing, but working with Hannah with some Q&A across a couple of platforms. So I know that I love the content that Hannah brings to the table and so what we can work through. So I'm really excited to get to have another chat. And Hannah, welcome. And how have you been at the moment?
Hey, Pete, thanks for having me. I've been great. We are making it happen in the car right now, so bear with any technical difficulties, but I think we're good. But I'm good. We're doing great. It's almost 8 o'clock here in Florida, Clearwater, Florida right now. We're wrapping up the last couple of days in spring training. So things are crazy, but things are really good.
I was going to say, so spring training at the moment. When does the season start for you guys officially?
So big league spring training is actually right around the corner. So the team breaks on the 30th and everybody heads out, and then it's opening day. So we've only got a few more days here, and then we're bringing in all the minor league guys in for their month of minor league spring training. So it's a lot of moving pieces right now, but it's really exciting. We're just honestly excited to be playing baseball. So no complaints on our end. Yeah.
Well, I suppose to get things started and thought process, let's get to know you a little bit. I know a few people have probably heard you speak with us before and know you a little bit, but I suppose to dive in, do you want to give me a little bit of an insight into your role and I suppose the background in how you got there?
Yeah. So my official title is a mental performance coordinator for the Philadelphia Phillies Major League Baseball organization. So I am a mental performance coach, which means I get to work with all of our players from multiple different levels. So we have big league guys, but we also have minor league players on all of the aspects of the mental side of their game, right? So it's just like any other coach, just like you have a hitting coach or a pitching coach or a strength and conditioning coach, right? They're helping them get stronger in those different assets of their game. And I'm helping them get stronger, and our mental performance team is helping them get stronger from the mental aspects of their game, which is really, like, obviously I'm very passionate about that, but that's anything from, goal setting to confidence to motivation to how do you be resilient and overcoming obstacles and failures and everything in between. So that's what I do. But I have my master's in sports psychology and motor behavior, which is a really fancy way of how the mind and the body work together to produce optimal performance. And that's what I do. I work with athletes and all types of performers. You don't necessarily have to just be an athlete. I think if you're a human being, you're performing. When you're Zooming, you're performing. And so I think mental performance skills are crucial to everyone, to any human being. If you're a significant other, if you are a parent, if you have a job, you're performing to some capacity. So I think they help everybody. So that's what I do. I help people's brain work for them instead of against them.
And I suppose, how did it come to the Phillies' attention? Because it's obviously something that, 10 to 15 years ago, it's not something common that we would sit here and be talking about the mental skills. How did the role come up with the Phillies, and what's kind of their goals with you being on board to be able to help their athletes and their coaches as well?
Yeah, so I think the general role has been around for quite some time now. I'd probably say 30 years now. The title of the role maybe is a little bit newer. And so, we actually have 5 mental performance coaches with the Phillies now, which is incredible. And so when I joined 4 years ago, we had 2. And so we've kind of added one every year. So I think it's growing, but it's really interesting. People are almost right now realizing, like, with mental health kind of being on the forefront of professional athletes and famous people of all over the world, people are starting to realize, okay, mental health is something serious. It's something that we all go through, and it's something that we can all work on, and so is mental performance. And so those are two separate things that intertwine and interweave in when it comes to performance, right? You have to be mentally healthy to perform mentally. And so but I think mental performance has really come to in the last 5 or so years. I mean, even when I was fresh out of grad school, there wasn't a ton of opportunities as far as internships and opportunities now. And now it's almost every year there's an internship with almost every team. And now it's actually spreading across different professional teams. I know the NFL is starting to try things. Hockey's starting to do things. So it's starting to spread. But I do think Major League Baseball is kind of at the forefront of that and leading that. And so I think that's kind of where the opportunity with the Phillies came about, is they recognize not only is there a need for mental performance, but oh shoot, we have somebody who can coach this. Like, we don't have to kind of just wing it and go on our own experiences. We can hire somebody who went to school for this and bring them in. And so now they have 5 of us, which is freaking awesome in my book. So yeah, that's kind of how it came to be with the Phillies. They prioritize mental performance almost as much as they prioritize physical performance, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
What does a week in the life of Hannah Huesman look like with the team? So obviously this is a little bit different, obviously being spring training and away from home and those types of things. But traditionally, what's your role within that weekly organisation as well?
That is a phenomenal question. I don't even know if I can tell you my daily schedule, Pete. No, so a week during spring training looks like it's the same. It's almost the same day every time. It's kind of like Groundhog Day. We kind of joke that it's Groundhog Day because you kind of do the same thing over and over, and then you change, and then you do the same thing that's different for the next 7 days. So it kind of just depends where you are. But a day in the life right now looks like you wake up at 5 in the morning. You have a workout at 5:30. By 6:30, you're showering, getting ready for the day. 7 o'clock, you have meetings to start the day, and then from about 7 to 1, you're doing anything from one-on-one meetings with players to presentation prep, to actually presenting presentations, to having some staff meetings and supporting the staff too. And then 1 o'clock rolls around and the game starts. And so then you go to the game and you watch some of the game. And then, depending on what the scenario is of the game, you're either watching the whole game, or you may go back and work with a player during the game, or work with players who aren't in the game. So it's kind of different, but it's mostly one-on-one work, and there's some group workshops here and there. And then it's also supporting staff, which I think sometimes gets forgotten too. So, because just like I said in the beginning, right, staff are performing too, just as much as the players are performing. So we're supporting them too. So I talk all day. I talk all day, every day, and I listen even more than I talk. So that's a week in the life, but it changes every day. So you kind of just go with it. And I learned very quickly in baseball, you can't really have this set schedule, or you can, but you have to be able to be flexible with that. So, things are, especially now in the COVID era here in the US, it's still a little strict. So,
well, as curiosity to kind of pick your brain on that as well, game day for you. So obviously during the week, there's certain things you'd work on, and each athlete's different and they require different aspects. Game day role, what does that look like?
Yeah, so great question. Once we get into normal season, it's you kind of show up at about 11 o'clock in the afternoon. So usually I work out in the mornings and show up at about 11. And usually it's meeting with the staff and the coaches and hearing what's going on, what's the latest with the team, if we haven't been with that team in a couple days, or just individual meetings with staff. And then the players start rolling in. And so you start kind of individual meeting with the players, and you're around, you're watching batting practice, you're watching them take infield, you're watching them do early work. You're always, the best way I describe a mental performance coach is you're always around, but you're never really like in the center of it. You're kind of always in the background, right? You never want to be seen, but you're also always want to know that you're around. So if there's anything anybody needs or just wants to have a conversation about it, you're there. And then during the game, it's actually really cool this year. We've been experimenting with where we are during the games. And we've actually been in the dugout, and it's been really, really cool. So during the game, we're in the dugouts with them. And like I said, like, you know, if there's something specific where we need to go back into the offices and meet with somebody, we'll do that. But for the most part, we're in the dugout with the game, and which has been really cool, just because I think sometimes there's so much that goes into the game that we play that you almost forget like the game itself, and you're worried about all these other things because, you know, it's so complex, right? Life is complex, but so is baseball and almost everything we do. And so it's been really cool to be in the dugout this spring training and really just being like, wow, like this is the game. This is why we do what we do. This is why we love doing what we do. So it's cool. And, you know, I played softball in college, and so it brings me back to the quote unquote glory days of being in the dugout and being a part of a team and just, you know, being in the trenches with them and supporting them through that. And, you know, sometimes it's casual conversations the whole time, and other times it's really serious conversations. So it's really just matching their energy and kind of being there for whatever it is that they need.
How's the response been, I suppose, from coaches? Because I see, and look, I'm not a huge baseball follower, but I normally see a lot of coaches, they are quite older. So how's the response been adjusting to having a mental skills coach sitting in the dugout? And I suppose from when you started, the acceptance of what I suppose the organisation are trying to achieve versus what they're used to and how that's gone. How's that translated as the time's gone on?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's actually been incredibly easy, at least with the Phillies. Like, everybody is pretty open-minded, especially it's hard when you talk to somebody about honestly any kind of performance. Like, there's no doubt in anyone's mind that to a certain extent performance is mental, right? And like everybody knows, right? Even if you don't know necessarily the how or the why or like what to do in certain situations, you know that a certain aspect of this is mental, right? Like, you can train all you can physically, but at some point you're like, ah, dang, this is pretty mental. Like, we're in our head here, we're doing this here, we're doing that here. And so I don't think there's any question that the mental aspect is important. I think the challenge comes in, how do we do it, right? Okay, great. We all know it's important. So can you teach us how? Can you teach us why this is important, right? You know, you think it's almost like the concept of, right, go out there and be confident, right? Just go out there and be confident, play good, go out there and be confident. And it's like, while that's a great idea and that's not wrong, it's also, why do we need to be confident? And even more importantly, how do we create that confidence? And I think that's the biggest differentiator is everybody can say, go be confident out there. Not everybody can say, hey, here's why you're supposed to be confident, and here's how you can actually practice this confidence. And I think that's where mental performance coaches can kind of take it to the next level. And it's kind of funny, you know, there's guys who have been in the baseball world longer than I've been alive, right? And so like, I'm like, I'm not going to argue with you. Like, you know everything. But at the same time, it's like, you know, some of the concepts that they talk about, it's like, you learn that from 20, 30, 40 years of experience. What if we could teach that in a year? You know, what if we could expedite the process of learning mental performance instead of like, well, everybody will just figure it out eventually. What if we could teach it? What if we could teach it in the minor leagues? So by the time they get to the big leagues, like, they've at least seen it and practiced it and heard of the concept, instead of, okay, it's going to take us 10, 15 years to figure it out. You know, most guys don't have 10, 15 years in the big leagues. They've got 1 or 2 years and then they're good, or they've got 1 and 2 years and then they're out, if that. And so I think that's one of the coolest ways I process it is, you know, you don't necessarily need mental performance coaches, but it's going to take a lot longer to get to where we could get if we had them versus if we didn't have them. So, and it's hard to argue with that, because they're like, dang, yeah, like, I learned this after years and years of experience. And I'm like, what if we could teach that earlier and take experience, but also take like practical solutions and strategies to practice and to implement that will make them know how to be more confident and why, and more resilient and more motivated and all of those things.
No, perfect. Well, I suppose the curiosity I have, how do you explain the Phillies have a separate performance and then clinical mental health support? So how's, obviously there's some concurrent themes that run through with that, but what's your role in separating the two, I suppose, as well?
Yeah, so we have an incredible, it's called an employee assistance program, and he is Dickie Knowles. That is our EAP, and he is incredible, but he basically handles all of the mental health And then we have my 5 mental performance coaches. So Dickie isn't necessarily a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a counselor, but he knows all of those people. So basically, like for instance, if you and I were talking and we're talking about performance and you're talking about being really nervous, and all of a sudden we start talking and we think it's performance related, and then we get down deep into it, and all of a sudden we realize, hey, like there may be something more going on, right? There may be some clinical anxiety going on, maybe some early signs of depression, or even eating disorders and things like that, to the most extreme suicidality thoughts, right? All of that. Then we get you in touch with Dickie, and he's incredible, and it's a really cool handoff we have. And I'm so grateful for that relationship. But then we talk to Dickie, and whether it's the 3 of us sit down and talk and figure out what's best for you, and then we figure out whatever you need, we're gonna find it for you. And I think that's awesome. And it's a common misconception, right? So mental health, like we said, is like, it's clinical anxiety, it's depression, it's suicidality, it's eating disorders, it's ADD, it's OCD, it's all of those things. And then you have mental performance, which is confidence, composure, concentration, focus, motivation, enjoyment, all of those things. So we can see the value in both, and they're both necessary. But if our mental health isn't there, there's really, if we're depressed, it doesn't matter how motivated we're trying to get you, right? We can't get you motivated if you're depressed, right? If there's this underlying mental health issue. And so what we're trained as mental performance coaches is to notice, okay, this isn't just mental performance, this is kind of going into the realm of mental health, and we got to do everything we can to support you and get you the help that you need so you can be the best version of you. And so whatever that handoff looks like, and then figuring out whatever they need, whether it's a substance abuse counselor or a marriage counselor or whatever it is that they need, making sure they have all of that at their fingertips. But both vital, but definitely very different. One's more, I view mental health as more reactive, right? Something's wrong, we got to respond to it. Whereas mental performance is, you don't have to necessarily wait until you don't have confidence to work on your mental performance. In fact, I would encourage working on it beforehand. So when you finally do reach that point where you don't have confidence, because we all will, or you reach that point where you fail, you've already had the skills in your back pocket and the tools that you need in order to get through that. So that's why I think mental performance is more proactive, where mental health is a little bit more reactive.
To jump onto that topic, which is probably a little bit earlier than I wanted to, but let's roll through with that as well. So we have our athletes are trained to be in peak performance physically, to be ready when a season comes through. What's either some tips, tricks, what do you work on with some of the athletes to get them mentally at their peak performance? Because baseball for us is a ridiculously long season. Like, there are so many games and so many intricacies around the sport, which is why it probably makes it confusing for us, because we don't see a lot of it. But the big thing is, what are some of the things you work on with the athletes to ensure they're ready and at their ultimate peak?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And one of the things I like talking about this is there's no cookie cutter answer, right? There's no like, hey, Pete, do this and you're going to be the most confident, most motivated, most focused athlete in the world, right? If there was, we wouldn't have a job and we all be Olympians, right? Like, it just doesn't happen. And so a big part is really getting to know who the person is as a human being first, and then figuring out, okay, here's your strengths, here's your weaknesses, here's what we can work on. Let's really focus on X, Y, and Z. And these things you're doing all right on. But, that can consist of a lot of what we talk about is perception, right? How you view something, right? Is the challenge or the failure or the setback in front of you, is it holding you back, or could it potentially be helping you? And then a lot of it is self-talk and how you message yourself. A lot of it is confidence training. A big piece of what we do is focus training, right? So actually, like, do you know how to focus on what you're supposed to be focusing on? Do you know how to turn that focus off? Do you know when to lock in when you need to be locked in? Do you know if it should be an internal focus or an external focus, right? Where do we need to be at? So it's really just creating awareness around what that person needs, and then making sure we create a plan in order for them to get to that. Breathing is a really big factor in almost everything that we do. Getting into the present moment is a big thing that we do. So it's hard to pinpoint one specific thing to work on with somebody until you're in and you know who they are and you know what their strengths and weaknesses are, and then you create this plan. But a really cool way to think about it is just like you would think about a like physical performance, right? When you go and you have a workout, right? You have a workout regimen for a month, right? Well, same thing comes for mental performance. You should have a mental workout for a month, right? You don't just come in and have a really awesome conversation and feel really good about something and then all of a sudden go perform really well that night. Heck no, like that's not how it works. You got to put in the work. You have to practice just like you wouldn't go into a game and perform a brand new physical skill, right? You would get reps and reps and reps and reps and hundreds of reps in. Same thing honestly goes for mental reps too. If you're trying to implement a new pre-pitch routine or a new breath or whatever it is, a new mantra, you have to practice it in practice before you can expect to actually use it and make it impactful in your actual game performance. And so I think people like, you hear this and you're like, yes, I'm so gung-ho, mental performance. Yes, we buy into it, but then it's like, hold on, we got to practice it. We got to put in the work. And I think that's the hardest part, is putting in the work in between the initial concept, which most people buy into. And then it's like, but do you buy into the work and the process that it's going to take in order to get you to where you want to be? Because we all know where we are and we buy in and we all know where we want to go, but it's that process and it's that journey that's ugly and monotonous and boring and the same thing day in and day out, but that's going to create that habit eventually, which is going to create the outcome and the performance that you are trying to achieve.
No, awesome. Well, I'll come back a little bit more to that as well. But what I want to touch on a little bit is probably a little bit about you and your online segment you've started. Started in 2018. I think I read up as well. Monday Mental Sweat. How did that come about? Where did that come from?
Yes. So Mental Sweat Monday, it's been over 2 years, which is insane. So it was funny. I was, as a mental performance coach, and I still get to this day, people are like, what does that mean? What's a mental performance coach? Like, what exactly do you do? And I love the question because I think our field in general, the field of sports psychology hasn't done an awesome job of really educating people on what we do, right? There's a lot: mental health, mental performance, sports psychology, mental performance coach, right, what is it? And so I first started out to educate everybody about what it is that I do, from friends to strangers to people I haven't ever met before, to the athletes that I work with, to performers I work with. I just wanted to make sure people knew, okay, oh, this is what you do. And these are the concepts you talk about. And it's really not that scary. It's just like any other aspect of our performance. And then it turned into, social media 2 years ago, and probably arguably still today, is covered with physical sweating, right? It's like all the things you have to do physically. You got to run every day. You got to do yoga every day. You got to run a marathon. You got to join CrossFit, right? Do all these things, and which is incredible. And it's just forcing physical health down our throats, right? Which is great. And we know we need it, right? We know we need to be physically active in order to be the most healthy we can be. And I was like, where the heck is the mental sweating? Where's the mental performance? And I think people were starting to create awareness around mental health, but mental performance was still kind of nowhere to be found. And the only thing you really found about mental performance was cheesy quotes. Everybody's really good about reposting the same quotes over and over again, right? You miss 100% of the shots you never take, right? Which is a great quote, but it's where's the freshness? Where's the nuance of okay, what do we actually do? How do we actually achieve that? And so that kind of really got me going. And again, the best way I compare mental performance is just like physical performance, right? You have to practice it. You got to sweat every single day. If you want to be mentally tough, you got to put in the work every single day. You can't expect to just go out there, you listen to one seminar or one Zoom call or one podcast or had one one-on-one session and expect to go out there and be great. You would never expect that physically, but for some reason, we have that expectation for our mental performance. And the reality is no way, no chance, no way. We have to practice it. And so the idea was maybe not break a mental sweat every day, but at least once a week we're breaking a mental sweat. And they're pretty basic surface level concepts. I mean, there's only so much you can talk about in 1 minute, but the whole idea is to start, sending off fireworks in your brain of okay, oh, this resonates with me. This is something I really need. Run with that for the week and go try that and figure out how that's going to impact you and make you better. And so it's been incredible. The response I've gotten from it is there's clearly a need for it. People obviously, again, going back to the very first thing, right? People know mental performance is a big deal. Nobody, I don't think, is questioning that, but I don't think people really know how to do it or even necessarily maybe the impact that it could make on your performance. And so it's really just one, I wanted people to know what mental performance was. And two, it was like, I wanted people to start thinking about mental performance in the same way they think about physical performance, hence mental sweat, right? When you think mental sweat, you think, okay, well, sweating physically, you got to go get a workout in. And so how do we get our workout in mentally for the day or for the week?
No, awesome.
Yeah.
What some common themes you see? Is there common themes you see across some of your players? And I know there's obviously different positions and different types of players that are playing through, but is there a common theme you see with athletes that they struggle with a little bit?
You know, it's funny. I kind of always come back to two things. And one is controlling the controllables. Like, we spend so much of our time and energy worrying about all of the things we can control, right? When we're going to get a bonus, when we're going to move up a level, when so-and-so, when's this going to happen? When's that going to happen? And ultimately you have zero control over it. And the reality of it is, if you want to achieve something, you got to figure out what you can control in that situation and spend all your time and energy on the thing you can control instead of worrying about just solely the outcome, which you may not necessarily be able to control. And so I think it's controlling the controllables. And then I think it's really that perspective shift of, are you viewing it as, right, even something as simple as like, I have to do something versus I get to do something, or something along the lines of, I feel like I have to do this. And the reality of it is, do you have to do it? Like, you don't have to, but your goal is here. And if your goal is here, then when you talk about having to do it, you should think about it more as if, like, if this is the goal you really want and you think you have to do this, instead of versus like, it's almost like, I guess the best way to describe it is almost a sense of gratitude and perspective shifting, right? You're grateful that this is happening because you're trying to achieve this, but you also know that it's not easy. And I think that ties in with like almost an elite or an outlier mindset, right? High level athletes and high level performers think differently than your average human being. And it's hard when you have all these friends and these people around you who are like questioning the things you do, but you have to remember that if you're trying to achieve something that not a lot of people have achieved, you have to do things that not a lot of people are willing to do. And so, like, everybody else is complaining about what they have to do, but you're not. Like, everybody else is out drinking and partying, but you're not. And that's a hard sacrifice to make. That's a hard line to draw. That's a hard commitment to make day in and day out. And so I think it always comes back to perspective and knowing the bigger picture, and also being willing to work day to day in order to get to that big picture. I think it's controlling the controllables, and then it's having that perspective shift is like something I'm almost talking about on a daily basis. If I don't talk about one of those two things on a daily basis, I probably haven't talked to another human being, because that's commonly coming up. So.
No, beautiful. I'm going to throw to everybody as well for any questions that may come. We're just starting to get a couple coming through, which I'll get to in a little bit too. I just thought as a common question we've had going through, and I know I mentioned earlier, is the ability to reset during a match, during an event, the ability for an athlete, a business person, you or I talking now, we might stuff up, we might make a mistake. Is there any advice or tip you can provide to be able to get back to that moment of going, right, I'm ready, let's go?
Yeah, I love this question. And arguably a reset routine may literally be the most important part of your performance. Obviously you want to get in the right headspace when you're coming into the game, and, you want to be motivated, you want to enjoy it, but it's almost like this idea of you're not planning to fail, but if you fail or if you have a setback, you have a plan. And to me, that reset routine is your plan, right? So for us in baseball, you have like anywhere from 12 to 15 seconds in between every pitch. And for both the pitcher and the hitter, that's the most important part of our at-bats, right? That's the most important part of our pitches, is being able to, regardless of what happened, are you able to continuously message yourself the same thing, both physically and mentally? And to me, the way you are, everybody always talks about being consistent in our performance. We just want to be consistent. Well, the way you are consistent is by having the same routines, regardless of what your performance is. So basically, the way I view it is, first game of the season, first inning out, you're doing a routine. Last game of the season, game 7, World Series, bottom of the ninth, you're doing the exact same routine. Because the minute you start changing like physically what you're doing because of the circumstances around you, you're messaging your mind that something's different. You're automatically increasing stress and increasing cortisol, right? And decreasing testosterone. Like you're decreasing your confidence and you're increasing your stress levels just by the way you're messaging your body, because maybe you're moving faster or you're thinking about this or you're thinking about that. And it's like, that is the moment where you have to come back and fall back on that reset routine, whatever that is, whether that's a breath for you, whether that's focusing on something outside of your body, whether that's singing a song, chewing bubble gum, blowing a bubble, like whatever it is. I don't really care about what it is as much as I care about how consistent you are in doing it. And I think that's the most important part is like, we've had some off the wall stuff, whatever. I don't care. You have to figure out what works for you. And then the key is to make sure you're as consistent as possible. And I think that's where the practice piece comes in is you can't expect to be consistent in your routine if you've never practiced that routine during practice. If you expect to just go out in a game and all of a sudden you've got this whole new routine, like no chance, no how, it's not going to work. But I really do think a reset routine can stop you from the downward spiral. It can stop you from panicking. A lot of times in the game of baseball, they talk about the game speeding up on them. And I think this happens in public speaking and presentations too, when things just start going really fast and get out of control. Like, how do you stop, take a deep breath, relax, get into your zone and your flow of whatever that flow is, instead of letting that overcome you? Which kind of goes back to also making sure, like, are you focusing on the things you can control or you can't? Because typically if the game speeds up on you and you start making mistakes and you start thinking about all the things going on around you, right? You're focusing on all the things that you can control and you're not focusing on the one thing that you can't control, which is you. And so I think a reset routine not only helps create consistency, but it also helps you remember, hey, I am me, and this is all I can control right now. I can't control the hitter. I can't control the umpire. I can't control the circumstances of the weather. I can't control all of these hundreds and hundreds of things, but I can control my effort. I can control how much I prepared for this game. I can control my self-talk of what I'm going to message myself right now. And so if there's only a few things I can control, by God, I'm going to do those to my best ability, because there are so few things that you can control. We want to make sure the things you can, you're absolutely crushing, and there's no doubt in your mind you're doing well on those few things. Does that make sense?
No,
that was kind of a long-winded
absolutely.
answer.
No, that's great. No, that is really good. And I suppose in speaking with that theme, athletes, they get ready prior to a game, they stretch, they hit the ball, they're looking at things, getting ready. What are some of the things, or is there things you choose to work on beforehand? Is it that practice of routine and those little things you work on from there? Breathing, is that kind of the aspects you work at?
Yeah, great question. So again, it's different for everybody, right? Whatever they need. And so I think what's key for performance is you knowing what your optimal level of functioning is. So maybe you're a really high energy guy, or maybe you're a really low energy guy and you're like really, we call it tranquilo, right? Really chill, really tranquil, like kind of doing your thing. So the most important part is knowing what kind of a person you are. And then the second part is knowing how do you get to wherever you want to be. So some guys, it's practicing mindfulness before a game. It's practicing diaphragmatic breathing. It's listening to slow songs. It could even be doing like a focus routine, like a focus chart where they have a chart of 100 numbers and they're trying to count down on these numbers, or doing a Sudoku or a word puzzle or something along those lines. Some guys like to watch film on themselves and get really excited about past performances and try to build that confidence up. Some guys like to listen to loud, crazy music because they're better when they're hype and excited and their blood is boiling and they need to be talking and yelling. And, we have ping pong tables in the clubhouse and sometimes they play ping pong games. So it's really interesting concept because there's not one right way to perform for anybody, but there is a right way to perform for you. And, know thyself is a message we constantly come back to in mental performance. Is you have to know how you perform your best, and both off the field and on the field, and when you're under immense stress. Like, how do you perform your best when you're under all this stress and have all this pressure coming on you? And I think that's the separator. Like, a lot of people think they know how they perform, but a lot of people don't. And so, a lot of people think they need to be this hype guy when reality, when they're cool, calm, and collective is when they perform better. So I think step one is knowing what kind of a performer are you when you're performing your best under stress. And then step two is figuring out how to do it. And that's where, like you said, like breathing techniques come in. We have guys practice imagery before they go out on the field, which is like seeing themselves successfully execute something, whether it's an AB, an at-bat, or whether it's executing a pitch that they've been working on for a while successfully, or maybe even being in a tough situation and seeing themselves get out of that tough situation, right? It's different depending on everyone, but it's pretty important to know what you need to mentally get ready. And I think it's harder because it's not as tangible as the physical skills, right? You got to be loose and run around and get your muscles warmed. Well, how do you get your mental muscles warmed? And it's hard because everybody kind of runs and stretches in a similar manner. They may stretch different muscles, but as far as mentally warming up, like that could look 180 from me to you, right? Of what you do to warm up versus what I do to warm up. It could look and some guys are overthinkers, so they can't do a ton of really thinking about what's going on. Instead, they got to stay loose and almost stay distracted and play ping pong games and do this, so they don't get in their own way. So it's really unique to kind of see how guys are figuring out how to navigate that and how to navigate getting ready mentally. But it's a real thing, and they absolutely do it. And again, it kind of comes back to knowing yourself and then figuring out what those techniques that you need are.
Yeah, awesome. As a question that's come through, we see performance in the physical form, which, obviously at bats, those types of scenarios. How do you track KPIs, and how does the club or the team and the organisation track your KPIs of success? So how does that formulate and come across?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because so many of what mental performance is intangibles, right? And so like the straightforward answer is we can't really measure a lot of what we do. I think a lot of it comes down to, okay, if you and I are having a conversation and I know this is when you're performing your best, when you're at this level of energy level, and this level of calmness, and then I'm watching you and then I talk to you after the game and I'm like, what do you got? And if your story matches my story, then we kind of base it off of that. But it's a lot just based off of what you think and what I think and maybe what a coach thinks, and then kind of bringing that together and creating this evaluation, which is a whole nother thing that we could probably talk about for an hour, is self-evaluation, right? Is like part of mental performance is knowing how to evaluate yourself, right? In a realistic lens. Sometimes we think we're way better than what we actually are, and sometimes we think we're way worse than what we actually are. And it takes guts and humility and confidence to really be like, okay, this is what I did well, and this is what I really need to work on right now. And I think that's where the KPIs, I think that's where it's really important, where you have multiple eyes looking at you and that conversation happening, because it's not, you can't just measure confidence. Like, so a guy looks really confident and is loud and boisterous. Does that make him a confident athlete? Absolutely not. That could be the most insecure player on the field, right? And so it's hard because confidence looks different in everybody. Resilience looks different in everybody. Like readiness looks different for everybody, right? Some people are really quiet, some people are really loud. And so there's a lot of intangibles, but I think it comes down to knowing who that person is, knowing what level they need to be performing at, and then having the accountability from both the mental performance coach and either a pitching coach or a hitting coach or somebody else to say, hey, you seem a little off today. And then does that player recognize that they're off or not? Right? Because sometimes like they may have no clue. And so it may just be creating that awareness, which is kind of a foundational piece of mental performance, is creating awareness around who you are, how you're doing, and what you're thinking. And then where do we go from here? So it's so challenging. That's like the hardest part of our job, right? Is it doesn't fit into a box, like strength and conditioning, hitting, exit velocity, right? They have all of these statistics. We don't have any statistics. Like, we have learning styles, we have attentional styles, right? How people focus and how they don't focus, but like, you can't measure confidence level, right? It's funny because I always try to come off as very confident as a mental performance coach. Like, it's going to be challenging for me to be good at my job if I'm coming across as not confident, but sometimes I have no clue what I'm saying or what I'm talking about, but nobody will know that. And so it's really challenging. And I don't think you can get to the bottom of that without sitting down and having that conversation and truly building that trust and that rapport with that performer to figure out who they are and what they are when they're at their best, which is why I think our job is incredibly challenging. And it's kind of the most challenging part, and the most fun part is there's no one easy way to do this. We have to figure out who you are and what you need, and then we got to hold you accountable. And then we got to figure it out, which sometimes it's by trial and error and saying, hey, try this. It doesn't work. Okay, let's try this again. Let's try this. Let's do this, and go from there. But it's definitely one of the most challenging parts. And it's hard being a part of a team of people who all have these tangible resources and examples, and we don't. And we're the one people sitting at the table like we know, but we don't have a number to prove this, right? And you know, we have an opinion. And so it definitely creates some challenges with how do we measure that, and how do we, it's hard. You can't compare mental performance to certain things, but at the same time, we're looking at it through the same lens. So it's really challenging. It's one of the if you can't tell, it's one of the most challenging things we deal with in our industry, I think.
And with you keeping everybody focused, how do you stay focused on yourself and what you want to achieve and the goals you want to achieve as well?
I love this question. It's funny. I feel like I'm kind of talking and supporting others all day, every day, like 24/7. And so my focus actually comes from unfocusing, I guess, if that's a word. It's from like totally detaching. Like I have to turn my phone off. I have to shut my computer. I have to turn the TV off. I have to either go on a walk with my dog if I'm home. I have to take a bath. I can't even read a book because my brain has a really hard time shutting off. And so for me, in order to focus and to stay focused, I have to unfocus. I have to know how to turn it off, and I have to turn it off really well. And I, when you're in spring training, you don't really turn it off. I mean, it's 8:30 at night, and we're on, and like I have a call after this. And so, but it's hard. It's for me to be my best and for me to be fully focused and in front of the person I'm in, I have to have my time of kind of being alone. And sometimes if I can, I practice mindfulness. I'm not perfect at it. None of us are perfect at it. But anytime I can just kind of shut off everything and be by myself and kind of check in on how I'm doing up here and kind of silent the world is actually how when I come back from that, I'm like laser freaking focused. But I think that's such an interesting concept, right? Because I feel like sometimes we feel like in order to focus, we got to focus more. And for me, sometimes like focusing more and trying harder is actually pushing me further away from where I'm trying to get. And so in order for me to focus more and be present more and be a better listener and a better responder, like I got to cut it off. I have to take a break. I have to separate, it's kind of funny because I talk to baseball players a lot. If you do anything 24/7, like you're going to get sick of it, right? If you're with your significant other for 24/7, you're going to be like, I need like 10 minutes, like just 10 minutes of alone time, right? We're going to need a little break from that. And so I think that's so real in anything you're doing. And so I kind of frame it to the players as get away from baseball enough to where you're like excited to come back the next day, instead of like you never turn it off. The whole night you're thinking about what happened and how poorly you did or how well you did. And then you wake up thinking the same thing. And then you get to the field dragging because you're mentally exhausted because you haven't turned it off, versus go through your process at the end of the day, evaluate your routine, shut it off, go home, enjoy your night, come back the next morning. You're like, hey, fresh start. Here we go. Versus you've held that burden all night. And I know sometimes I do that too. And I think that's really hard sometimes. But I think stepping away is sometimes the thing you need most in order to be the best version of yourself. And I think the world kind of skews that a little bit because they're like, no days off, no seconds off. If you're not working, they're working. And I hate that, because I think sometimes the best thing you can do for your performance is rest or get away from it or take time to turn your phone off or to do whatever it is you need to do. And so you kind of have to take a step back and say, okay, in this very moment, what's the best thing I can do for my performance? And if it's grind, you go grind. If it's run, you go run. But if it's silence and getting away and resting, then you better make sure you're making that silence and getting away and resting happen. Because I think we can make workouts happen really easily, but I think it's a little bit harder, especially for those really driven, really motivated people to take that step back and reset. I know it's hard for me, so that's what I do.
And do you feel that's applicable and applicable for kids in school and for coaches to apply to their athletes that are working and business owners? Like, obviously the Phillies are a big organisation and that's implemented there, but do you find kids coming into the system, they find that a really difficult, I suppose, transition because all they've been told in college and in high school, work.
Yeah, without a doubt. Without a doubt. And like, I mean, we still battle it with some guys and I'm like, take a day. And they're like, nope. And I'm like, why? Why? Like, let's talk through this. Seriously, do you think you'll be better if you work your tail off today and you're dog dead tired tomorrow, you're exhausted? Do you think you'll be better tomorrow for doing that? Or do you think you'll be better tomorrow if you can get 2 hours off your feet today? And it's funny because it's almost like they know the answer, but it's like ingrained in their brain, like no days off. And so absolutely, I think there's pushback and I think that's where the education piece falls in and educating people like, hey, I so appreciate your love for the grind and like you're trying to be the best you can be. What if in order to be the best you can be, it includes rest or it includes separation and you may be missing that piece, right? You want to be the best you can be. I want you to be the best you can be. Do you think it's rest or do you think it's pushing right now? And like, that's a hard look in the mirror when you're like, you need to rest, but you don't want to admit it. But then when you ask, right? Because the ultimate question always comes down to like, how do I be the best version of me? How do I be the best version of me? How do I get to the big leagues? How do I get that promotion? How do I do whatever I need to do? And the reality of it is, in order to be the best version of you, part of that equation is probably rest. And I think that's a hard realization because we've been told so long, like no days off, no rest, when the reality of it is like, maybe that could actually be the one thing that could be holding you back. And so I think that's exactly a mental performance coach's job, is to help them see that perspective of like, okay, you've been taught this and you think this way. Is that right? Or should we challenge that? And maybe that's right for some people, but is that right for you? And is that what you need? And really helping them dissect and figure out who they are, kind of always coming back to know thyself, and figuring out what you need.
Have the coaches always at the Phillies embraced that from the start? Was it a little challenge to get that thought process in at the start when you first started with the organisation?
I think surprisingly it was really smooth transition. Again, I think people in baseball, like, they know the importance of mental performance. I think it may be like, oh wow, now we have somebody actually teaching that, like we've just taught that forever, and now there's actually people who went to school and study this who can actually help and kind of take it to the next level. So I think people were intrigued. I think it was just different. We were the new kid at the table. We were like, oh, this is something we can actually like teach and integrate and make a part of our culture. But I don't think anybody was like super anti. It's kind of funny. I think about, you always have players on the team or in any industry who, like, there's always a kid who doesn't like to work out, right? Or there's a kid who doesn't like to eat healthy. Well, same goes for mental performance. There's the kid who could care less about mental performance, so I try not to take it personally. But, there's always like, some people are way more passionate about lifting than they are mental performance. And some people are way more passionate about mental performance than they are nutrition, and so I think I learned in grad school, one of my first lessons was, especially in mental performance, it's a saying called go with the goers. You can't really force mental performance on people who aren't ready for mental performance. And so you kind of have to just build those relationships. And when they're ready, the door's open and they know where to find you. But you want to just run with the people who are bought in and know they need to work on it and are aware of maybe some strengths and weaknesses that they have, and support them in everything you can. But it was better than I probably initially thought it would be, coming into the baseball world. So, I mean, again, like any high level performance, like, they know there's some kind of mental aspect. They just may be hesitant in like, how do you go about it kind of way. So it's interesting.
Cool. As towards the close, guys, and I'll put it to everybody in the Q&A section if there are any last questions over the last 10 minutes. But I suppose a thing for me and to pass on, if you work for somebody or you're an emerging athlete or an athlete that doesn't have somebody like yourself within an organisation, is there any resources or places to look online or ways to go to help I suppose, learn more and get to know more about their, mental well-being, but also in ways that they can help their performance?
Yeah, I think, of course, yes, there are. I mean, Google is an amazing tool. And I just caution anybody who's just like Googling things is be careful trying to fit everything you read may not be applicable to you. And so like you don't like Google 100 workouts and decide to do all of those workouts, but for some reason mentally we kind of think we'll do that. Oh, we'll set goals, we'll start a breathing exercise, we'll start fasting, we'll start practicing imagery all today. And it's like, hold on. Maybe the first thing you need is to just start breathing. And so the best advice I can give is find a book, find a podcast that you really are like drawn to, and just dive into that one thing for a week or 2 weeks or even a month, and then go from there. I think people have a tendency to just like want information overload and want as much information as they can get as fast as they can possibly get it. And that can almost become paralyzing, right? It's just like, if you've ever journaled, right? And you're like, I'm really passionate about journaling, and you start journaling and like the first day goes great, second day goes great, third day, okay, fourth day, not so good, fifth day, you don't do it. And then you never pick up the journal again. And it's like, okay, what did we do? Right. And so I think it's start in small increments and don't try to do everything at once. Whatever the resources, there are a lot of really good resources out there. There are a lot of really sketchy resources out there. So I would say books. I would recommend books over anything, because I think anybody can kind of jump on a podcast and say anything that they're feeling. And I'm a little more hesitant on the podcast, but if somebody's published a book and they've sold a few copies here and there, like there's got to be something good in that takeaway. And I mean, even the first book I ever read about sports psychology was Mind Gym. And it's just like a bunch of different, it's like a daily, like little paragraph chapter that you can read. And then you just read this chapter and you just think, okay, how does this apply to me? Does it apply to me? Right? Just because you read it doesn't mean you have to do it that way. And I think that's a misconception people have in mental performance. So I would just say, find something that you're really into, that you're really bought in on, and start really small, like 2 minutes a day. Like that's how small I'm talking. Not even 30 minutes a day, right? 2 minutes a day, because I would rather you do something 2 minutes a day than 30 minutes for 2 or 3 days and then never do it again. Because I get it. Our time is precious. Our time is valuable, but that's how we create habits, is by small 2-minute little things on a consistent basis. And then all of a sudden one day you're going to be like, hey, okay, I think I need to spend a little bit more than 2 minutes on this. And then maybe it'll become part of your daily routine, and it's a 15-minute process instead of 2. So start small, figure out what you're passionate about, focus on one specific aspect. And if you have specific questions on like, hey, I'm really struggling with confidence or something like that, like feel free to shoot me an email, and I'll try to get you at least a starting point on where to start your research on that. But there's a lot of good stuff out there, but just be careful and don't believe everything you hear.
No, well, Hannah, that's all the questions have come across, and a massive thank you for taking the time, sitting in your car at what is it now, nearly 9 o'clock at night. So yep. I do appreciate taking the time. A big thank you to our partners as well for putting on today and helping us at that next step as we get closer and closer to the actual event of the Gold Coast Conference. So big thank you again, Hannah, and really appreciate taking the time.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
No, have a good night.
Thank you.